Kia ora everyone, this is almost everything you'll need to know about the nerves of the upper limb. Yikes. We'll start by looking at this mess, which is the brachial plexus and the axilla. The key to orientating yourself to this sort of drawing or diagram is to identify this M-shaped combination of nerves proximally, and then we can identify with confidence the musculocutaneous nerve, here plunging into coracobrachialis, the median nerve, which is the combination of the two roots, one each from the lateral and medial chords, and this is the ulnar nerve, the continuation of the medial chord. Because in this diagram the axillary artery has been removed, or not drawn, we can also see the posterior chord, which would normally be hidden by the artery, here, and it becomes the radial nerve. We can simplify the picture by removing all of the proximal branches in the axilla that don't project to the arm, and we discussed those in a previous video anyway. We can see that apart from the major branches we just identified, there are smaller branches which include the medial cutaneous nerve of the arm from the medial cord, and that supplies skin in an area something like this. We also have the medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm, which travels down past the elbow. Laterally, we can see here some small branches which are branches of the axillary nerve. The cutaneous branches are known as the upper lateral cutaneous nerve of the arm, and it covers this area here, which is called the regimental patch area, as shown right here. And inferior to this we see some more small branches, and these are from the lower lateral cutaneous nerve of the arm, which is a branch of the radial nerve. In between these is an inconstant area which is supplied by a branch from the second intercostal nerve, so it doesn't belong to the brachial plexus, but it's called the intercostobrachial nerve. Just label those. I won't spell out cutaneous nerve of. If we take a look at the posterior aspect of the arm, we can see some of those nerves in a little more detail. The upper lateral cutaneous nerve of the arm, the branch of the axillary, the lower lateral cutaneous nerve of the arm, branch of the radial. This is also a branch of the radial, even though it looks like it's coming from the axillary. It's just emerging from a similar area. This is the posterior cutaneous nerve of the arm. Emerging here from behind triceps, we can see another branch of the radial nerve, another cutaneous branch, which is the posterior cutaneous nerve of the forearm. Moving on to the anterior forearm, we can see now the cutaneous distribution of the medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm. It's very extensive, and it's paired with the lateral cutaneous nerve of the forearm, which is the terminal cutaneous branch of the musculocutaneous nerve, here emerging from between biceps and brachialis. Posteriorly, happily, we'll just see those nerves we've already met. The lateral cutaneous nerve of the forearm from the musculocutaneous, the posterior cutaneous nerve of the forearm from the radial, and the medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm from the medial cord. Again, a very extensive distribution for that nerve. So in summary, there is a medial, a posterior, and a lateral cutaneous nerve of the forearm, and there is a medial, a posterior, and two lateral cutaneous nerves of the arm, the upper and lower lateral cutaneous nerves. Both of the medial cutaneous nerves of the arm and the forearm are purely sensory nerves. The others are the sensory branches of mixed motor and sensory nerves, either the axillary nerve, the radial nerve, or the musculocutaneous nerve. We'll now look again at the anterior aspect of the forearm, and this is where the fun begins. I'm going to remove the superficial nerves we've already seen, and also brachioradialis, and here we can see the branches of the radial nerve that were lateral in the cubital fossa. Also going to remove brachialis here and these three superficial flexor muscles to further expose the nerves. So we see here the main trunk of the radial nerve, which we noted crossed the elbow anteriorly. In the cubital fossa, under cover of brachioradialis, it splits into two branches. This long branch is the superficial branch of the radial nerve, and it's an entirely sensory or cutaneous nerve. It doesn't start supplying skin, though, until it gets just proximal to the wrist. The other branch is the deep branch. It supplies the overlying extensor muscles, brachioradialis and extensor carpi radialis longus, by these twigs. The main trunk of the deep branch, an entirely motor branch, plunges into supinator here, emerges posteriorly from it, winds its way around the shaft of the radius, and runs deep in the posterior compartment, supplying all of the muscles of that compartment. Once it re-emerges in the posterior compartment, it runs very close to the interosseous membrane. Although anatomists continue to refer to it as the deep branch of the radial nerve, clinicians prefer to call it the posterior interosseous nerve. Sometimes it's abbreviated to PIN or PIN, or for any listeners from Australia, the PIN. If we look at the median nerve now, it enters the cubital fossa medially and continues medially in the fossa here. It supplies the three superficial muscles that I removed, pronator teres, flexor carpi radialis, and palmaris longus. It also supplies flexor digitorum superficialis, which it runs under the free edge of, and it gives off its own deep branch, which supplies flexor pollicis longus and the radial half, that giving rise to the radial two tendons of flexor digitorum profundus. The deep branch is called by clinicians, of course, the anterior interosseous nerve. If we remove flexor digitorum superficialis, we can see the continuation of the median nerve in the forearm as it moves towards the midline or median plane, and the deep branch here, which will supply these deep muscles, pairing nicely with the posterior interosseous nerve, which is on the other side of the interosseous membrane. The ulnar half of flexor digitorum profundus and the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle are supplied by the ulnar nerve, which we recall lay just behind the median nerve in the arm here, but did cross the elbow posteriorly behind the medial epicondyle and re-emerges in the anterior or flexor compartment by passing between the two heads of flexor carpi ulnaris, continuing on down to the wrist, covered by flexor carpi ulnaris medially and by the flexor digitorum superficialis muscle anteriorly. We can complete the picture by drawing in the vascular structures. The brachial artery here dividing into the radial artery, which runs just medial to the superficial radial nerve. The ulnar artery, which courses ulnarwards to join the ulnar nerve, and the common interosseous artery dividing into the anterior interosseous, which will follow the deep branch of the median nerve, or anterior interosseous nerve, and the posterior interosseous artery, which will cross through a gap in the interosseous membrane and follow the posterior interosseous nerve in the extensor compartment. So to summarize, the radial nerve supplying all of the muscles of the extensor compartment, the superficial branch lying under cover of brachioradialis and running very close to the radial artery, the median nerve supplying most of the muscles of the flexor anterior compartment except for flexor carpi ulnaris and the ulnar half of flexor digitorum profundus. The ulnar nerve supplying those latter two muscles and running in the main neurovascular plane alongside the ulnar artery. If we were to draw a quick cross-section or axial section at about the mid-forearm, brachioradialis here and flexor carpi ulnaris here, the deep flexors, flexor pollicis longus, flexor digitorum profundus, and flexor digitorum superficialis over the top, the four superficial flexors, let's say here, the deep extensor muscles and the superficial extensor muscles in this fashion. The ulnar nerve, the ulnar artery, the median nerve, the deep branch of the median nerve or anterior interosseous nerve, the superficial branch of the radial nerve, and after coursing around here, the deep branch of the radial nerve or posterior interosseous nerve, the radial artery, the posterior interosseous artery, and the anterior interosseous artery. Final stretch. Superficial branch of the radial nerve, descending, crossing the anatomical snuff box, dorsal branches to the thumb, the wrist, and the radial 2.5 fingers. We'll see that a bit better here. This is it. These dorsal branches don't go quite to the fingertips. The dorsal aspects of the fingertips are supplied by branches that come from the median nerve. So the radial nerve, superficial branch of the radial nerve, gives way to these branches from the palmar surface. The medial half of the dorsal hand is supplied by a dorsal branch of the ulnar nerve, and it does extend all the way to the fingertips. On the palmar surface, we can just see some of the superficial radial nerve. We have 3 cutaneous branches of the median nerve, a palmar cutaneous branch here, which crosses over the flexor retinaculum and is the only branch of the median nerve that doesn't get entrapped in carpal tunnel syndrome. A lateral branch to the thumb and radial side of the first finger, and a medial branch which supplies the adjacent sides of the remaining fingers that the median nerve supplies. The ulnar nerve also has a palmar cutaneous branch. It's not shown in this diagram. It starts off in about the middle of the forearm and then descends down and just supplies a small area over the hypothenar eminence. Its dorsal branch we saw. It has a superficial branch which supplies skin to the remaining 1.5 fingers. There are 2 remaining branches, one from each nerve, and they're both motor nerves. The median nerve has a recurrent or thenar branch, which after emerging from the flexor retinaculum hooks back over the thenar muscles, hence its name recurrent, and supplies abductor pollicis brevis, opponens pollicis, and the superficial head of flexor pollicis brevis. It also supplies the radial 2 lumbrical muscles, the 2 that are unipinnate. The deep branch of the ulnar nerve is deep in the palm and hooks around underneath the flexor tendons to supply the hypothenar muscles, all of the palmar and dorsal interossei, adductor pollicis, both heads, and the deep head of flexor pollicis brevis, and the remaining 2 ulnar or medial lumbrical muscles, the ones that are bipinnate. That's almost everything you need to know about the nerves of the upper limb. There are diagrams in your book and this nice table of the nerves in the hand. It's been a bit of an odyssey, but I hope that you found these videos helpful. We'll move on to another region of the body next time. Until then, ka kite.